Hello LEGO fans, welcome back to LEGO 48. This video is going to be a little different from my previous videos. You see, it's the holidays and my wife and I are having a little disagreement about what this table should be called. She says it's our dining room table. I call it my LEGO workplace. Since we have company coming for dinner, I lost that debate. So today I'm going to demonstrate building techniques using Bricklink Studio, provided by the good folks at Bricklink. Let's get started. When I first built LEGO models as a kid, it didn't take much to put them together. You stuck bricks together and they stayed that way, in some cases for years at a time. Even when LEGO Technique got introduced, you could put a gear on a shaft and it stayed where you put it, at least for the 5 or so minutes that we played with it before moving on to something else. Running a GBC module non-stop for a 6-hour show is a whole different ballgame. Consider this simple arrangement of a motor being geared down through 2 stacks of Technique bricks. This arrangement will work for a while, but as the drive gear rotates, its teeth are actually applying a vertical force to the following gear. As long as the axle for that gear is fixed in place, that vertical force will be constrained by the gear itself, and the path of least resistance will be for the gear to rotate. However, throw in a couple of hours of vibration and the Technique bricks will gradually lose their grip, and eventually that vertical force can cause the bricks to separate, suddenly disconnecting your motor from the rest of the module. You'll discover this has happened during a show when all of a sudden your in-basket fills up and starts overflowing. The key to fixing this issue is to build gear trains with Technique bricks above and below the gearing bricks, and lock them all in place with vertical beams. In this case, all of the axles go through the middle row of light gray bricks. These are now sandwiched between a single red 1x8 brick underneath and a red 1x8 plate on top. These in turn can't go anywhere because of the yellow Technique bricks above and below, which are then held in place by the light gray 5-hole beams at either end. This works because the stud-to-stud, or hole-to-hole, spacing for LEGO bricks is exactly 2.5 plates. That means that a vertical beam can align every other hole with horizontal bricks that are 5 plates apart. Because this is measured from center to center, you have to ignore half a brick, or half a hole, at either end. The easy way to do this is to just not count the starting hole or brick, but then count everything after that. Now let's take a look at the Brick World Workshop module and see what we can learn from it. Here is the entire module in Studio. We can use Step View to go through the building steps and put this together virtually. What really struck me about this design was that the gear train is implemented vertically, and it's fairly shallow, no more than 5 studs deep. The other thing that jumped out at me was the designer's use of 4 and 5L axles with end stops, and how those ends are locked in place by putting them through a Technique brick and then putting a solid brick behind them. Also, notice that in every case, the axle is supported on either side of the gears. Which brings me to the first 3 principles of working with gears. 1. When you put a gear on an axle, you have to put things around it to keep it from moving along the axle while it's turning. That means Technique bricks on either side of the gears, and all of the open space should be filled in, either with other gears or with bushings. 2. It won't do you any good keeping the gears in place if the axle itself can move. Therefore, axles have to be locked in place as well, either by blocking off both ends of the axle, or by using an axle with an end stop and locking the end stop in place. And third, you always want to make sure that both ends of the axle are supported. Extending an axle out through a brick with a gear on the end of it is not recommended, as that will lead to excessive wear of the axle inside the brick. Now, sometimes you just can't avoid having a cantilevered axle. For example, the final axle connected to the wheel is done that way. But this is the very last axle in the gear train, so it turns the slowest of them all. If you have to do a cantilevered axle, at least try to limit the application to as low a speed as possible. Finally, after getting through the gear train and the wall behind the wheel, see how he uses these 1x1 Technique bricks to create anchor points for the vertical beams. These beams then run the full height of the module, so all of these bricks, this entire wall and the gear train, are all locked together and can't come apart due to vibration. I had 2 of these in Chicago, and we ended up using them extensively as emergency spares to replace other modules that had failed. These things were completely reliable, and I used them again at Brick Fair, Virginia, and at the Air and Scare event in October. They haven't let me down yet, so I'm going to keep taking them with me to shows. One other item of importance is the concept of having an agitator in the in basket to keep balls from jamming. Another builder that I spoke with mentioned that, before he added a thumper to keep bouncing the bottom plate of his in basket, the average number of balls that could get through before jamming was around 5. I built an oversized in basket to match the size of his, using my latest design. What was funny was that, when I dropped a basket of balls into it without turning the agitator, on average, I would get about 5 balls to go through on their own before the rest would jam, and the agitator became necessary. Go figure. And speaking of baskets, one of the things I learned at Brickworld is that GBC modules will fail during a show, and when they do, the common tactic is to shove the module aside and place one of these portable baskets under the outlet of the previous module. When the basket gets about half full, it gets swapped out with an empty one, and the full one gets hand-carried to the next working module and dumped into its in basket. So yeah, the spec says that modules have to be able to handle up to 30 balls at a time, but I can tell you that getting 60 or more dumped in at once is pretty common. The other thing about these baskets is that they are all 10 studs by 10 studs by 10 bricks high, exactly the required dimensions of a GBC spec in basket. Aside from guaranteeing compatibility to accept balls from any module, we often get questions from the public about the GBC spec, and the baskets are useful for demonstrating the in-basket requirement. Another useful item that I discovered at Brickworld is this ball picker. The fact is, despite our best efforts, some balls will fall out of our modules over the course of the day, and half of them will end up rolling underneath a GBC module where they're hard to reach. This simple ball picker makes retrieving them so much easier. Before Brickworld, I had this vision of all the GBC modules neatly passing along 1 ball per second, on average, in a nice continuous stream. The reality is different. First of all, machines run at all different speeds, and due to module failures, there will be gaps in the ball flow. So modules will often run empty for a while, or there may be just a slow trickle of balls, say 1 every few seconds. Then someone will come by and suddenly dump 60 balls into the hopper. Over the last couple of months, I've reworked my in-basket design to something that I'm really happy with. It's still asymmetrical, but now I only have the curves on one side. On the opposite side, I now have a straight diagonal that comes down 1 stud further back. I've also replaced the bionicle eye with a rotor blade. This can be either straight or 3-bladed, it doesn't matter which. Underneath, I've simplified the gearing and pivoting mechanisms, so I can use an 8L axle with end stop, and then on the other side I can use a friction pin as the other pivot point. Finally, at the front end, I can just use some beams leading to these connectors. These give me a lot of flexibility to adjust the height of the front edge just by moving either end of the beams to change the attachment angle. One last thing that I discovered about shows. The official GBC spec suggests that GBC modules are always going to be in a straight line, and therefore, balls will always come into your inbox from the leading edge. The truth is, modules may be aligned in a zigzag arrangement, or some modules will expel balls at a weird angle. Consequently, I try to have flexibility in my in-baskets, and always bring enough spare parts so that I can create additional backstops as needed. That's all I have for today. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions, or if there's anything in particular that you'd like me to cover in more detail. If I can, I'll try to address them in future videos.